everyone, and happy International Day of the Girl to you all. Thank you very much for being here. Welcome to the Wheeler Centre Question Time. This is a series that we do once every month or so where we talk about some really interesting things with some really interesting people, and you guys get to ask these interesting people all the things that you've wanted to know about their interesting subject. So there are very few things which are, to me, less interesting than girls and how we raise them and what it means to be a girl in 2017. Does it mean that we're empowered, objectified, confused, liberated, maybe all of those things at the same time? So it's also a very good time to look at some of the more complex issues around being a girl these days, which include a whole array of things: social media, feminism, celebrity messaging, equal access to education. The Wheeler Centre's been running a whole series about girls this week, as you probably know. So this is a good opportunity for us to get into some of these questions about what it means to be a girl in 2017 with some people with some very diverse views and areas of expertise. It was very interesting and sad for me to open up the paper this morning to read the results of a survey done by Plan International with some 600 girls here in Australia, to find that in Australia, half of all the girls surveyed responded that they are seldom or never valued for their brains over their looks. 1 in 3 say that they always do more housework than their brothers, and tragically, just 14% felt that they were given the same opportunities to succeed in life as boys, which I think in 2017 is a fairly sad indictment and makes me wonder if we're actually ever going to get any better. So these are some of the things that we might be able to talk about with some of our panellists this evening. Before I introduce them, I'll just tell you how it works. So we've got 2 ushers, and it's quite difficult for me to actually see you when you raise your hand, but the ushers will come and see you, and they'll pick you out, and hopefully we'll get to as many questions as we can. It's Q&A, so it's not a panel discussion. So please come with your best questions and ask as many as you like, and we'll try and get to as many of them in the hour as we can. We finish at about 7:15, and typically I find that there's always a rush of questions at the end. So if you've got a burning question that you know you want to ask, get in early is my recommendation. All right, so let me introduce our panel this evening. We'll start with Nelly. Nelly Thomas is a comedian, health advocate, columnist, and author of What Women Want. And perhaps most importantly, she was an under-13 girls regional state BMX champion in her home state of WA.
Thank you. Thank you.
You still on the BMX, Nelly?
No, I had a tragic accident. We don't talk about it, Madeleine.
Oh, yeah. Sorry about that.
I never rode again.
Oh, no, that's terrible. All right, Anna Barnes is an award-winning playwright and author of the book Girl, The Ultimate Guide to Being You. She regularly speaks to girls at schools on a range of subjects from creativity to self-esteem, and she's now working in the family violence sector as well. So she's a very accomplished person with a very wide range of interests, and she has a cat.
Yes.
Called Joni.
A very beautiful cat called Joni.
After the Joni?
Joni Mitchell.
Yeah, okay. I'll just get you just to bring your microphone in a little bit closer
Joni
if you can,
Mitchell.
Anna. Thank you. And Dr. Mimmie Claudine Ngum Watts is a public health expert who leads the Bachelor of Health Science at Victoria University, and she is also a Victorian Multicultural Commissioner and mother of 2 girls.
A son.
And a son. We don't mean to forget him. And I'm Madeleine Morrow, so I host the Question Time series here. I'm a reporter for 7:30 in my day job, and I have 1 daughter and a daughter currently cooking. So this is of great interest to me. All right, Nelly, I mean, before we get to some questions from the audience, just to give you guys an idea of perhaps what the panellists, their range of expertise is. I mean, Nelly, you've been in the feminist movement for
A couple of years.
Maybe since you got on that BMX bike.
Yeah.
And, I mean, do we, as the mother of 2 girls, do we need to be raising feminists, or are we in a post-feminist era now these days?
No. We're definitely not in a post-feminist era. I doubt anyone in the room thinks we're in a post-feminist era, especially if you listen to the stats that you read out from Plan International, and obviously there are there's swathes and swathes of research that show we're absolutely not in a post-feminist era because we're not even close to gender equality. So I think it's important to consciously raise, for me, in my case I've only got 2 girls, but if I had a boy I'd do it as well, consciously raise feminist boys and girls, absolutely.
And what does that look like for you?
Wow, it's difficult. I'm not going to lie, it's difficult because I remember the first time my eldest daughter, who's 9, was begging for Barbie. So anyone who's got girls will know this issue comes up. And we'd sort of said, oh, look, we'd prefer, doing that very, very PC thing. We'd prefer you didn't have Barbie. We don't really like Barbie. And this went on and on for a long time to the point where she eventually said, on my birthday, it is my present. And I'm like, oh, shit. So in the end, we relented and we allowed her to have Barbie on the condition that Barbie had a job. So Barbie made her way into the house. Barbie's like cockroaches, you can't keep them out. So we had a compromise, I guess, and I think when you're trying to raise children consciously based on any belief system, there's going to be a series of compromises like that. I would have sworn in my university days that no Barbie would ever enter my household, and yet there's probably about 12.
Oh, so you firmly lost that war, did you?
Absolutely.
Right.
They all have jobs. Right? They all have jobs, and my daughter can tell you what jobs they have. But she definitely made it into the house.
Okay. I was the same with fairy stories. My daughter, who's 5, desperately wanted fairy stories.
Yeah.
And at fairy stories, they always end up meeting a prince and getting married 5 minutes later.
Yeah.
So now what I've actually inculcated in her is they get married so soon, don't they? And
yes.
she said, and so now she spontaneously says, and they got married and lived happily ever after. She goes, Mummy, they just get married too soon.
Yeah, that's right.
I've had at least one win there.
Do you know there's a lot of that in our house as well, going, wow, what's up with that?
Oh, that's good.
I'll do that thing of when you see that sort of thing on TV, for example, or in a story. Gee, have you noticed there's no girls on that show? What's up with that? Because I know that that's the kind of language that my girls are going to pick up, and they start doing that as well.
It's a full-time job though, isn't it? Staying on top of that.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Anna, so you wrote a book of which you have a couple of copies here, literally
I do, a handful,
which people can buy afterwards. And I mean, it's called The Ultimate Guide to Being You. What's the book about, first of all, I think is a good place to start, and what you want people or girls to get out of it.
Yeah, it's a book, it's for girls around, preteen to teenager, and it's a non-fiction book, so it's about kind of finding yourself, whatever that means, and, kind of taken with a bit of a tongue-in-cheek because I realise how ridiculous that kind of concept means. So it's really about writing a lot about my experience and the experience of people that I grew up with, and just kind of trying to find out who I was, what I was interested in. So there's a lot of stuff about human rights and different kind of activism that you can do, and environment stuff. So it's kind of like a mixed bag. It's a lot of activities. It's very activity focused. I wrote it because it was something that I really wished that I had as a teenager. And I grew up in a household without Barbies. I grew up in a very feminist household where my mum well and truly won that battle. Yeah. And to her shock and horror, I am wearing, I ended up being quite a femme feminist anyway. But I grew up in a very, very feminist household, thank God. It was amazing. So it's just a book about all different things about the world around you and how to engage with it as a girl and what's going on.
Yeah, and when you go and speak to girls about engaging in the world, what do they tell you about where they see their place in the world? And here I guess we're talking about your pre-teen, kind of early teen.
Yeah.
What do they tell you about how their experience?
They're pretty active. I think girls especially are far more active global citizens than I think adults give them credit for. I think with not just the advent of the internet, because the internet didn't exist when I was a girl, and I still was quite active in kind of different kind of community actions. But they're very involved. Everyone seems to know who Malala is, which is pretty incredible because I think a lot of adults don't know who Malala is. So, yeah, they're very, involved and engaged with like what's going on around the world and stuff that's happening in the community, especially younger. I find grade 5, grade 6, and I did a lot of interviews for my book with different girls, and grade 5, grade 6 are very interested in leadership. So I'd often say, what's your favourite things? And they're like, being a leader. So being a leader is a very kind of popular activity for the girls. I followed some of them.
Funny.
I know, like, what does that mean? But like, I love it. Good.
It's awesome.
Yeah, it's awesome. It's just
having a classroom full of leaders.
Yeah, exactly.
Is
they're like, what are you good at? And they're like, leading. I'm like, cool, great.
But what's interesting is that you find, I mean, look, I don't know, but from my own experience with girls a little bit older than that, you find that then is something
massive
which is lost.
drops off. And what was interesting with my book is I actually followed a couple of girls through where I was interviewing them through the whole process of writing the book, and it dropped off immediately as soon as I would say year 7, year 8, just straight down.
What happens then?
I think you become a teenage girl and you become, interested in that. Like you probably, become more focused on internally as well. But also, I think externally you become, a teenage girl. You become an object, and that's something that I think a lot of kids don't experience, and that's quite shocking. I remember when I was a teenage girl finding that really shocking when all of a sudden men looked at me and I was like, what are you doing? It's like, oh, okay, that's what's happening now. So I think there's a lot of changes that happen externally and internally during that period. And leading, I guess, just isn't as cool as it seems when you're in grade 6, but disappointing. But
and you work with your PhD, Mimmie, was with a lot of teenage girls because that was actually on teenage pregnancies amongst the refugee population. So you probably have quite a different. We talk about here. We can in our culture about teenage pregnancy is something to be avoided. But in the work that you do, that's not necessarily the case. It can be something to be celebrated.
Yes and no. I was raised by a village, as you know, and growing up, a girl is socialized to be a mother, and motherhood is something that people take pride in. And my work around teenage mothers and refugee young women here in Melbourne really revealed something quite different, because I found out that teenage pregnancy, with all the issues that the young women faced, was not necessarily bad for most of them and for a lot of them, which is something that we would not really believe. And when you think about it, they've grown up in a society where motherhood is the ultimate for any woman, most often than not. However, when they've migrated here, there is almost like a movement away from that for young women. But also when you think about the context that some of them migrated in, some came maybe with extended families, some came with friends, and some came with people that maybe they never knew because maybe they lost everybody and that person decided to save them. And they found themselves sometimes, often without anybody that they can call brother, sister, auntie, mom, or a blood relative. So there was a type of a longing. But despite all the challenges that they faced, becoming a mother for some of them actually gave them a sense of purpose. And I think their survival, or what happened to their lives post being a young mother, was often the level of support that they had. And that's why I said I was raised by a village. And coming here as a skilled migrant, there were other things that I found also being a young mother. I had my daughter at 20, and my daughter Sherry Rose, who is right there, and I've got Tracy Kate as well. And they're leaders by their own right in different ways. And I think what you see as a young mother is, if you have the right support, despite obstacles in my own personal journey, but also in the journey of some of the people that I've met, I think the key is around supporting them.
Mm-hmm. Which is not always the case for many young mothers, teenagers who have babies in Australia.
Absolutely. And I think also, therefore, from a very young age, I think that the involvement of extended family, I think, is quite critical, but also for the young mother's mother. Is a very critical aspect. And if I just take you back what it means for a young woman from the culture that I come from, for example, they don't push you to get out there and have a child. However, if you do have a child while you are still unmarried with your parents at home, before the young woman goes into marriage, the family takes the child, except the father of the child, the biological father, decides to take the child. But most often than not, that child tends to stay home and they bear the name of the mother. And the reason is why they want to protect that child and give them social security, especially for young girls. And also that for the young woman getting into that marriage, she goes to a marriage where she doesn't have other responsibility, but that also protects the child who has been born so that nobody ever abuses them, except the new husband accepts not just the girl, but the child. And there is a saying about it in that you've not only gotten a woman, but you are lucky to have a woman and a child together. And there's really pride and dignity in that as well. So I think it's very cultural.
So you do a lot of health promotion work, Nelly. I mean, what sort of messages do we send to teenage girls in Australia, in your view, about sex, about pregnancy, about being a mother? What are those messages that you think that we send, or that we should be sending?
Well, I think they're very different. I think what we do send is very mixed messages, very confusing messages. I think the way that I'd put it is that I think we drag a lot of young people, not just girls, but a lot of young people prematurely into a sexuality that they're perhaps not ready for, and then say, now you're on your own. So as much as we like to think it's 2016, we're all very open-minded and we all talk about sex, and my experience is not that at all. In fact,
so how do we drag them into it then?
Culturally.
Right,
I mean,
right,
I think...
okay. You don't mean parents, you mean the wider culture.
Not parents necessarily. Well, parents inadvertently in exposing kids to culture in some ways. I do think there's some responsibility on parents about... in effect, censoring what kids consume. You don't let your 5-year-old sit down and watch the news. I don't know why you'd let them watch video hits either, frankly. But I do think the bigger problem, it's not even so much the culture, but it's the fact that we are still stuck in a pretty 1950s mentality about talking about sex and sexuality. So the young people who are being exposed to this stuff aren't equipped. They're being taught, if at all, about condoms, maybe about preventing pregnancy. The stuff they want, and again, all the research bears this out, is, well, how do I know if I want to say no? How do I say no? How do I know if someone likes me? What's sex supposed to feel like? When do you have, if you've had it once, are you supposed to have it again? All these sort of, what's sexting? What does that mean? What if I've done it? Is it my fault? All those kinds of things that terrify parents and people over the age of 20 in general, I think, but are so important for helping young people navigate what is obviously a sexualised culture.
So sexting is a very big issue, and there might be some questions about sexting and other forms of social media here today. I just want to ask if are there any, who's got girls in this room? And who is a girl in this room? I was thinking more of the 16 or under variety. We've got 16, 17. Could we get a microphone up here if you don't? Do you mind? I'd just be very interested to hear your experience of what you feel being a girl is like in Australia today, and then we'll get to some questions.
What was the question?
So it's a really small question with a really simple answer. What do you feel like, the pressures on you as a 17-year-old girl today?
In terms of sex?
In terms of whatever you like, in terms of body image, in terms of sex, in terms of education, expectations, parents.
Well, what really kind of so far that was interesting was what you said about growing up, you're very confident in being a leader and such. And then you get into high school and... Oh, God. It's just, you become, I guess, more aware of what others think about you, and I guess that also weighs down on how you're perceived. You want to be perceived, basically, as how would you put it? Like how you look at other girls, and you want to be looked at how they are looked at, basically. So I guess it's kind of people just follow what's going on and whatever makes them feel good. And if someone behaves in a way where they're confident, then you're like, oh, well, that works for them, let me do that. And I guess in terms of sexting, there have been people who might not, you would think, oh, they would never do that. But they're like, it makes me feel good. And I guess that's a lot of the things, is making yourself feel good.
So that's quite a bit of terrifying news for parents to hear, that sexting, thank you very much for that. Sorry to put you on the spot. Any other 16 or unders back there who want to share their experience? Dobbed in by mum. Is that someone who wants to share? I can't. No,
that was very much.
That's fine.
That's
okay.
a shaking head.
Okay, so this. I mean, when we were talking about sexting backstage, you were saying you used the word hysteria.
Yeah.
You think that there's a lot of hysteria around sexting. What do you mean by that?
Well, I do. I think there's a lot of hysteria about teenagers and sexuality in general. And I think one of the things that's really difficult to separate is that all of us forget, and I mean, I know this is a truism, but it is actually true. All of us forget that what we were like when we were teenagers, and we forget what it's like to be in that space and have those kinds of hormones and everything that's going on for teenagers. To me, sexting, can it be problematic? Absolutely. Where do we focus our moral outrage? On the girl who took the picture. The moral outrage, if there is moral outrage, should absolutely be on whoever passes it on without consent. The issue is the consent, not the picture. And it's this no different to me to porn. Talk about the content, talk about the culture that creates it, but the main focus has got to be on the issue of consent and not the fact. It's not unusual for a young person or two young people to go, you know what, this is pretty sexy, you're hot, I'm hot, show me your boobs. Like, this is not an unusual thing, and yet we, as we have done since time immemorial, make it dirty and weird and taboo rather than going, yeah, no, I get why you do that. I get why you do it. I'm worried about it, but I get why you do it. Don't pass it on, mate.
Yeah.
I guess just to add to that point, in terms of not just the sexting bit about it, but the culture of obedience that girls are socialized from a very young age. And I, just again thinking about my own childhood and lots of people that I know, they've grown up being taught to be obedient. You have to conform. And a good girl doesn't question. A good girl is silent. And I can tell you, I get questioned a lot. Because I get questioned a lot. But that is how you've been socialized to behave. So sometimes the young women find themselves in the situation where they've not actually been able to negotiate before, because it's not been modeled, but it's also culturally not acceptable. And then they find themselves almost like in a deep end. So we need to look at those cultural nuances that exist and where these young women exist within. And I think that shapes most often not their decision to do certain things or not to do certain things, because we want them to conform. At the same time, we don't want them to conform.
It's a big burden, isn't it?
Can I just add something very quickly to that I think having been, so I'm in my 40s now and I've been involved in feminist stuff since I was 17. One of the things that worries me most for my girls and younger men and women of this next generation is that I think we've got to the point where feminism is seen as the choice is the end. So if you're given the choice to sext or not to sex, well, that's a victory. That's not enough. We have to ask, why did you make that choice? What pressures are behind that choice? What culture is behind that choice? What pressures are bearing down on you? An examination of any choice, whether it's motherhood, sexting, abortion, it doesn't matter what it is, all the big subjects of feminism. we have to examine the choices and not just go, well, I've got the choice whether or not to have a boob job, so great.
It's a much bigger question.
It's a much bigger question.
Okay. Have we got any questions from the audience so far? Oh, you're all very obedient.
There's a hand waving down there, I can see.
Just here, the lady just... Oh, right, sorry. And then we can go to this lady here. Thank you.
Oh, yeah. During the 1960s, there was a huge platform for women to go to university and everything, and the result of that is Hillary Clinton almost reaching the top of the world, and yet she's sort of completely ignored as a woman. I mean, she hasn't sort of got on stage with Gloria Steinem or Germaine Greer. I don't know if that's not to offend men, but she hasn't even said that women should get into jobs and find jobs for women. And
I think she has.
Yeah, no, she has.
She's made quite a big platform of, of being. Don't mean to, shoot you down, but I think that she has made that quite a part of her platform. Was there a question coming from that? Did you have for the panel, sir, or a wider point?
Well, I'll sort of have another question. With African women, I mean, the nice lady said that, she got married or had a child at 20. But, I mean, wouldn't it be cheaper just to have an abortion or go on the pill than to bring up a child?
I was married at that time, and I wasn't a teen pregnancy. So it was, and my parents did not ask me to get married. It was my decision. And it was a decision that every young girl does when they are that age. So I don't blame nobody. I went to a private school, so I was very educated. So it was not any accident. However, we also, when we think about abortion, and this is where when we look at statistics on who is having babies where and teen pregnancy, we have to consider the rates of abortion within particular groups. I was born in Cameroon. Africa is 54 countries, but most often than not, one, in many countries, abortion is still criminalized, but secondly, the status awarded to a mother outweigh anything else, and thirdly, it is not about being pregnant or having a child. It is about the context within which you've had a child. So having a child within a marital context is very different to having a child when you are in school. And which is where we have to think about when we are talking about those marriages, and we have to also think about the support. Does that mean I accept child marriage? Absolutely not. I disagree with it, but we also really need to look at the cultural context within which they exist. And as I said, in my case, I was a young mother by choice. I was very intelligent, and I left. And by 24, I did not have a degree. I had 2 kids, and by 35, I had a PhD. So for me, and I think it's about the support and, the focus of the young person rather than, and I have never seen myself as a victim in any way or form. And I think my girls can testify for that for themselves.
Madeleine, can I just quickly add something to that I had my last child at 38, and it would have been cheaper for me not to have a child too. And I mean that sincerely, when we talk about children and abortion and costs and all the rest of it, I think there's an assumption that certain groups of women lose money if they reproduce and others don't. All women lose money if they reproduce. All.
Regardless of how old they are.
And race and class and sexuality, and et cetera, et cetera. I just wanted to make that point.
Yeah.
I wouldn't trade her in. I'm not saying that.
Maybe some days.
Yeah, well.
Hi, I just want to say I was a little bit shocked by the last question, but anyway, I'll move beyond that. I wanted to ask, we were talking about sexting, and I wanted to ask, how does one raise the danger about these, whether it's sexting, whether it's things such as, giving into peer pressure, early sexual activity, how does one talk about that with girls without necessarily normalizing it and without making them defensive, or I'm trying to figure out how in this day and age when we're bombarded with all these images and articles, how does one discuss these issues without normalizing them?
I would question the concept of normalising, because I think the unfortunate thing is, even if you don't want to normalise it, it's already normalised for your child. I think the most important thing is having open conversation, so making sure that she feels comfortable to talk to you about anything. Obviously, these are kind of like embarrassing conversations to have, but she's having them. I'm sure she's having them with her friends. She might be watching different YouTubers like Lacey Green. There's a number of kind of different resources that exist that girls use to talk about these things. So I guess I would be honest with her and say, this is embarrassing and a weird conversation, but I want to have it. Because I think if you come in kind of strong, it will potentially, she might be a bit defensive. If you're really open about it and say, I read this thing in the paper and I just want to talk to you about it. I know this might be weird for you, but I guess that's how I'd approach it. And that's definitely how I approach all conversations with girls when I'm speaking at schools or in what capacity, because they're generally far more resilient and engaged than we give them credit for, and usually they hold our hand through the conversations. So yeah, that's...
Yeah, I think that's true. I think I would also add the main thing, especially if you're talking about anything to do with consent, which is really what sexting's about, that's what the conversation's about. Wherever practical, make sure that a boy is involved in that conversation. Because I think the worst thing you can do is basically say to that girl, you're responsible for managing consent. So, for example, if you raise, for argument's sake, if you've got a teenage girl, maybe an entry point is to kind of go, I heard about, this, there'll be a scandal in the paper.
Yeah.
There will. What's like, do any guys at your school do that? So rather than opening up the conversation with, have you ever taken a sexual picture and passed it on, put the focus where it should be, which is the bad behaviour.
Yeah.
So we had an American friend who's like Irish-American traditional dad, and his approach to when he was called in by his daughter's school, and the school said, this is going on, you need to talk to your girls about it, it's happening in your class. His approach was to come home and say, if you ever sext anyone, I will kill you.
Yeah, that is exactly what my dad would have said to me. But if I can, really, I was raised up in that particular way. And my father, if as a child, remember what I said? I was raised by a village. So you hear the saying that a child, it takes a village to raise a child. I was raised up by a village, which means if that auntie, and it doesn't have to be blood auntie, they saw you doing something that was naughty, they punished you. They go and they go to your parents, report you to your parents punish you, and maybe if you filters through to school, you may also be punished at school. So you had all these people correcting you. On the reverse, if I try that with my children, and the Cheryl Rose or Tracy Kate is going to tell me exactly why I should not do it that way. They will not scream at me, but they will let me know that they're not going to take that approach. So it's also about us parents. And I have had to learn, especially being a young mother, to shift how you think and how you approach these things with your own children. It is difficult, but it is possible. But really empowering them to make their own decisions. I think the best thing is about empowering the young women, but being a model for them as well, because the things that you do, inevitably, it's going to catch up with your own children.
That's right. And I think that's a funny example, and you hear a lot of that. But I always just come back to, if fear and shame worked as a prohibition for any sexual activity, frankly, the churches would have succeeded, and we would have never had teenage pregnancies. There'd be no one who had ever had same-sex sexual attraction. There'd be no, it doesn't work.
Yeah.
So it might make you fearful in the short term, but all that's going to do is make that kid, if they want to do sexting, do it behind your back.
Do you think that this is one of the biggest issues actually facing girls today? Are these issues around sexuality, social media, and how they use them, or do we just get focused on those because as parents that's what we're scared about?
I think it's the biggest issue for adults more than it is.
So what would you say are bigger issues for girls?
Yeah, I would ask a girl. I don't know how I would feel.
I think the constant change. You know, the technology, I asked my daughters the other day, what is it that challenges you people? The constant change. Technology, you get something within 6 months, it's changed. You have to start all over. So they have to keep up. And we have to think about, we were raised with none of this technology. So when you did something, it was confined within particular circles. These days, within 10 minutes, it spreads like wildfire and the ripple effects. So we really just need to take a step back and then think about the context. And then also talking about the point you made before. There's an African saying that if you want to lead and make the decisions, it's better to speak softly and have a big stick with you. But if you speak very loudly and you have nothing, it's not going to be done. So it's better to take that gentle approach.
I have this image of you like speaking very softly to your children with this big stick here up on the side.
It's an African adage.
I want to get to a next question if we can, please. There's one here. Yeah.
Oh, hi. Look, I just wanted to ask about the culture of girls. Particularly, I have a 12-year-old daughter, and I find it extraordinary the kind of mean behaviour that happens. She's in year 6, and it's excruciating. It's just really, she's not a shrinking violet. She's not overly super sensitive. But it's the meanness that happens at her school, and I hear from other families in their school. That's what really sort of shocks me. With
How does that manifest? What sort of things?
Exclusionary. Like a friend of hers was having a birthday party, and in her school, like when the girls have a birthday party, they'll decorate their locker, and they know that she's a good friend with this girl. So one group of girls just went and decorated the locker with specifically not telling her about it. These cruel little elements that keep happening. And I just sort of wonder, within the culture, it is a cultural manifestation, I see.
Do you think that's new though?
No, I don't. I don't think it's new. But I'm just thinking, in your experience, if you could advise mechanisms of changing that.
I think we should not be human. Do you know? I mean, it sounds like I'm being glib, but I just think like humans can be mean, And I personally, I don't see. I think young people are perhaps more open with their meanness. Having said that, what's going through my head? I'll tell you this. I got an email today based on I'm not even on social media, it's a whole other conversation, based on an article that I wrote earlier in the week saying you're just a fat white female Waleed Ali, which I took as a compliment.
Yeah, I'll take that.
Seriously. And that's presumably from an adult. Yeah. To me, I'm not even on Twitter or Facebook. This is someone who's found my personal email and, taken the time. That meanness is not confined to 12-year-old girls. Do you know what I mean?
So, one of the things that we talk about a lot these days is resilience. But that, again, puts it back on the person who's experiencing it, doesn't it?
Yeah.
And maybe one of the things that we should be spending a lot of time on, as well as teaching our girls to be leaders and teaching them to be, aiming for the stars and trying to go to university, is just how to be kind to one another.
I think it's about that self-empowerment and resilience. And I think when girls are empowered, and you have to, from a very young age, let them know that there are certain challenges that they're going to face. We are also in a society where the kids are overprotected. I'm sorry, but that's true. Such that the little things, even them fighting with each other, they learn certain skills. There is difference between bad fighting and there's good, they say, like sibling squabbles.
Yeah.
And kids are expected to do some of those things. And I think we should not take that away from the children, because that means when they find themselves in situations where they should be able to negotiate, because these things are going to inevitably come up, whether they are still in school or later on when they are working, they are supposed to have learned that from the family unit at home. And this is where, because the unit, we cannot expect our children to get everything from school. The teachers cannot replace the parents and the family.
I Couldn't agree more. I actually have a bit in my book about good fighting. So the idea of how to fight fair and the idea of, fighting with friends. We can't teach girls, I think that's a real danger to kind of talk always about girls. I really despise terms like Princess Bitchface and these, which are very popular title of a book.
No, it's disagreeing to agree.
Well, exactly, and this idea of Mean Girls and that kind of culture. While I think that book, Mean Girls, and whatever the book, I can't remember what it's called, about Queen Bees and Mean Girls. That's actually seems like a lot of people seem to get a lot out of that book. But I genuinely resent this kind of idea of like girls are horrible, girls are mean, because I think generally people are pretty rough. And I think teaching girls as well how, when we teach girls always to be kind and sweet and smile, it does mean that maybe when when girls fight, they might not be told the social kind of cues on how to have a fight with your friend and it still be okay, it not be the end of the world. Girls are humans, that's just the unfortunate reality.
But not decorating somebody's locker or, that's just...
It's just mean.
That's really mean.
It's that age as well as like identity creation, and unfortunately identity creation often comes from exclusion. So we often kind of base on who we are and who is not part of this, and that's just general humankind.
And they don't even have to be that old, do they? My youngest girl's 4, and for want of a better description, it's a crappy term, but it's just a shorthand description. She's a tomboy and she's often mistaken for a boy. So I've got a Barbie girl and a tomboy who people call Justin Bieber. And some of the kids at kinder are really cruel to her about, looking like a boy. And it just breaks your heart. It is heartbreaking. The only thing that we've managed to come up with is just to say to her, sometimes people are going to be mean, and try and find someone who's not. Mm-hmm. You don't have to be nice, you don't have to placate, you don't have to try and make them like you, which is probably the approach my mum would have taken with me, or that generation.
I think even now, this generation,
but just to go, you try and find your people.
Yeah, and that not everyone has to like you. And I think that's something that's often, when I speak at schools and, often the issue is that like, but they don't like me. And it's like, they don't have to like you. That's a pretty harsh thing to say to a kid.
That's a good lesson, is it, for girls?
I think so. I think so, that not everyone is going to get along, and you're not going to be best friends with everyone, and you probably don't like them that much, if you're honest with yourself. Yeah. So I think that the idea that girls need to be perfect and everyone's friend and all these things, is part of the social constructs that means that we have quite nasty behaviour, but also this idea that everyone wants to kind of fit in and be friends with everyone and be that girl,
I think it's fun. That overprotection sometimes. I think we need to protect our children, but at the same time, we should not live our fears through our children. So because kids, we need to give them that a little bit of opportunity to also think about what is out there in the world. And, sometimes we can be very protective. And I think in a society like Australia, where when you turn around, almost, it's migrants, for example, and, we have a multicultural society where we talk about it, but technically people really don't embrace it. So there's an element of fear that we have to, turn around and take that away. And just realize that most people out there are good people, and that, people mean well, and there are good intentions. So let's be a bit more optimistic and positive, protect your children, but, there are boundaries of that protection as well.
Just going full circle back to the allowing them to make mistakes and so on, and I understand this is treacherous ground, but going back to the sexting, for example, if at all possible, through a range of techniques and life and whatever, you've raised a kid who doesn't care if that boy likes it. So if the boy says, I want you to send me a picture of your vagina, and she's not comfortable with it and doesn't care if he then goes, well, I don't like you, she's in a much better position. It's actually about what happens before the sexting, not what then happens after.
Yeah, that's a very good point.
Absolutely.
Okay. All right, next question. Yeah.
Hi, firstly, I love your book, thank you. My daughter absolutely loves it.
Oh, I love it.
I've got a 12-year-old daughter and 2 sons who are younger, and
Where are they?
They're not here, unfortunately.
They're in the car. They're all right.
But
Windows open.
You rolled a window down.
Heaters
maybe I've
on.
had a slightly different experience, but I feel that it's such a joy to bring up a girl and boys in this day and age.
Oh,
They
that's
seem-
lovely to hear.
Yeah,
we don't hear
please.
much
Or
of that.
I-
That's lovely.
Yeah, I just think as a 12-year-old in particular, and maybe it is because she's in grade 6, so I'm a bit terrified about what's coming next.
She's still in the leadership
Yeah,
mode.
but the confidence, just even the lack of self-consciousness in her puberty, all of that type of thing I look at and am absolutely astounded at. And I suppose I've taken the approach to not censor really anything, particularly from a reading material. So I feel like they can self-censor themselves quite a lot and have quite a lot of open dialogue. I suppose my question is, I look at it and go, wow, this girl's so confident and she talks to me all the time. How do you maintain that through that? Hearing the audience say, you go to high school and you feel that drops off. How do we stop that from happening?
Well, it might come back.
I hope so.
You see, just because it drops off for a while doesn't mean that it won't come back. I think that's, don't freak out if it does drop off, and it might not. But if it does drop off, I think you've got to trust in your own parenting and your kid and recognise, well, yeah, she might go through a bit of a period where, let's be honest, as a culture, we don't reward female leaders. So why would a 13 or 14-year-old girl stick her head out and want to lead the pack when that head's going to be, that's a reality. So that doesn't mean that she won't have the strength later to do it.
And I think you have to trust the children.
Yeah.
And I think sometimes that's what is missing. And that means we have to learn to trust them. Until you learn to trust them. And, teenage years, being an adolescent as well, is a developmental stage in life. And their body is changing physically, they're developing emotionally. There's a lot going on there. They're trying to find their own identity. Who am I? And what am I going to be? So there's a lot that is going on. And during that process, they question themselves, but other people also question them. And everybody responds differently to different situations. So I think it's about keeping those conversation lines open, keeping them open, and also just trusting the young person.
I've got a question for the audience. We obviously worry a lot about raising girls. For those of you who have boys, can I just get a show of hands about who worries more about raising girls versus who worries more about raising boys? So let's go for girls first. Who worries more about raising girls? And who worries more about raising boys?
I don't have one, but I would.
Yeah,
if I
right.
had
Okay.
one.
But we talk so much about girls though, don't we? And why is that? Why do we talk about that?
I think I think we have a kind of paternalistic nature towards girls because the reality is, so many times when I go and speak at schools, there's a kind of dialogue around, I've come in to speak to the girls because the girls have been, so to say I've been brought in because girls might have had some friendship issues and there might be some exclusion going on. And there's often that kind of lazy sentiment of like, but boys are all right because they just work it out themselves. But we're living in a time where men are killing themselves at unbelievably high rates. And we need to be looking at this and we need to be looking at masculinity from that young age and talking about that. And so I think it's a misnomer that we're like obsessing over kind of the mental health and the sexuality of young girls. I think at the expense, because I don't think it should be one or the other, but I do think it's interesting, our obsession with young girls as opposed to young men, when I would say there is a real crisis of kind of, I hate to use the term masculinity because I sound like a men's rights activist, but like more like, there's something going on. Like we need to talk about how can men talk and how can men have these kind of emotional conversations from that young age.
But am I right in thinking that we do sort of like there is more of a conversation about, girls, this and, we're very concerned about the girl child.
Definitely.
And sort of at the expense of the boy child?
And I think so, and I agree that we should also focus on the boys because we need the boys to to champion the causes of women and for young girls. And this is why we have the programs like the He's for She's. And those He's for She's are the best champions for girl rights, for, in supporting young women. However, there can also be that over-focus just on the girls compared to the boys. And if I take it again back from where I grew up, the fear for parents was always like an unwanted pregnancy. Why? Because it's going to bring shame to them and it will reflect badly on your parents. But also, in societies where people don't have social security, most often than not, for the young woman getting married is some sort of a social insurance later on. So there is a type of a long-term protection by the parents. So they may be making certain decisions that we may turn around and think that they are very harsh now, but 20 years down the line, you realize that it was about protecting that girl. The way they do it, and this is why sometimes we need to just take back a step and say, what is the context? And who is making the decision and why is it that they are making it? And until we understand the whole sociology and the whole context of where people exist, we really cannot say it is bad or good. But it's really important in this whole masculinity sphere where, unfortunately, some of the things that that boys and men they do is actually bad for their health, and which is when you turn around. If I come in with the health perspective, we know that women will visit their doctors more often than their husbands. We know that women are much more likely to talk about their health to their friends. Why? Because young men have also been brought up to think about this whole masculinity thing where being sick is not macho enough and all of that. And what does that mean? It damages their health. So it's about making men also aware that, it is not okay to be too macho because it damages you. So raising them.
And also
equally.
on that, in relation to health, is, the number one, for under 45, the number one reason for disability or preventable death or mental illness for men is suicide. And for women, it's family violence. So it's men killing women. So we need for men to be having these conversations because they're killing women. So it's quite a...
And isn't that interesting though, when if we accept the premise that there is the focus on girls and raising girls, it's ironic given that, if I can put it bluntly, it's boys and men that we need to change. If we're going to end things like family violence. But we have historically, and we still continue to ask girls and women to manage men's behaviour.
And on the one hand, we are focusing so much on girls, but then if you look at, all those studies constantly come out about teaching, and teachers spend vast amount of their time looking and engaging with boys.
Right.
And
really?
so,
Okay.
and so like all the kind of like... Sorry, hang it right up for that one.
We've got 8 minutes left,
yes,
so I do want to try and get to some more questions if I can,
So I don't think it's
please.
necessary. I'll just finish that one point because I just realised it's not necessarily that there's more. It's not. I don't think it's a case of like we need to like spend more effort and time on boys, because I think that exists. I think it's just kind of directing it in a clear way. So rather than kind of obsessing over girls' sexuality or whatever, what have you, it's about saying, okay, well, rather than kind of punishing boys or, joking with them and whatever, let's have real conversations with them during that time that we're spending.
Okay, let's have another question.
Hi, thanks. It's a great discussion and so many issues have been raised. But I want to try and perhaps get your views about the role of schools and gender equity in particular. So I do have 2 boys. They're both older, and the youngest one is a girl. She is quite astute, a very quiet girl, but what she said to me when she first had to wear a school uniform was telling, and she's now in year 11. So in is it 7 when they go to high school here? She had to wear a school uniform, and she's very athletic. Child and young woman. And she said, oh my God, I can't do any cartwheels. I can't kick a ball. I can't do a number of things because I'm stuck in this dress. So what happened? It was interesting. I thought, geez, I'm a feminist. I never thought about that.
So were you talking about from a very practical sense like that, or are you in terms of dress, or are you talking about the role of schools in terms of academic achievement and expectation?
I'm actually
on girls?
talking very broadly. I think about sense of identity and a sense of who you are and self-worth.
All right. Sorry, was
I
that
haven't
the end of
actually
your
asked the
question?
question though. So the question really is, in this particular school, now from the last 4 years, that was kind of the first little insight that there might be a gender issue that she picked up. She's one of those kids, Nelly, I think, that unfortunately is quiet and sticks her head up. And identifies
So what was the
feminist.
question that you wanted to ask?
And the question really is, what is the role of schools when a girl does that? Because what has happened is that girl is punished by detention for refusing to wear a dress, by being told that as a girl you need to sit in a particular way. And in fact, there was a media story not that long ago in the paper. That's the school that I'm talking about, and I won't name it, was not one of those schools, but it was interesting that another school or other schools being told
Okay, I'm just going to cut you off because we don't have very much time left, and I'd like to get an answer
Well, I want to
from the
get this
panellists.
point out, because what it in fact has happened is that there's been a sustained practice where a number of the boys, in fact up to 50, it's a large cohort, have decided that a girl who is athletic, identifies as being a feminist, must be a guy, and has been bombarded and bullied with photos of penises and what have you. And it's the school's conduct, though. I'm not talking about the boys' behaviour. I actually think it's a great opportunity to educate the boys. But what I'm really keen to hear about is your views about, as a parent, if this was something you witnessed and saw over a number of a period of time, how would you address and what would you want the school to do? And how would you deal with this particular issue?
All right, let's try and get a really quick answer if we can. Can we start with you, Mimmie?
Okay, this is my opinion as a parent. If I was a parent and it happened to me, what I would do is check if the school can allow the child to wear pants to school. If not, I'll move my child to a school that is going to be more accepting.
Okay, that's a very swift answer. Did you guys similar answer?
Yeah.
Okay.
And I'd speak to leadership in school, and hopefully, if there isn't,
She's getting the policy change. I'm talking about the gender bullying.
So the school has to take leadership in ensuring that no child in school is bullied in whatever way.
Absolutely.
The policy is very clear.
All right. Can we just have... Where was the next question? Because we only do have a couple of minutes. This lady's had her arm up for quite some time.
Hi. I'm a mother of a 35-year-old daughter and a 29-year-old son, and the grandmother of a 20-month-old granddaughter, and I was a high school teacher for 42 years. You need to get your daughter out of that school because no school, if you've protested enough and talked enough and they've done nothing, it's really bad for her to be there. I can't believe that the situation you've described has been allowed to keep happening in 2016 because in my experience it wouldn't have ever happened. So my question is, now looking on as a grandparent, I think we've gone backwards. I can't believe that we're in the situation we're in, where if you'd asked me in 1973 or 1968 when I went to uni, if we'd been having these conversations now, I would never have believed them because, I don't understand. But the one thing that people have been saying here, you'll never get equality unless you bring the boys with you. Yes. And in my experience from the 1970s onwards, that's what you had to do, bring the boys with you. But the most important thing you can do for your daughters is to be open with them and to teach them to be resilient and not to protect them too much. The idea of good fighting, or the idea of not everyone has to like you and you don't have to like everyone else, and you don't have to be perfect. And everyone comes in several shapes and sizes, and really make that live, it works.
I would say the one good thing, I know that it feels really, really awful at the moment, and I think working in family violence, it's really hard for it not to feel really, really awful all the time, because I guess we hear such horrible stories. But I would say the one really kind of amazing thing about right now is the internet has opened up so many, and it has opened up a lot of really bad stuff for women, definitely, but it has also opened up the world for young girls. And we have so many different ways to be a girl that is so accessible. And the way that when I go speak to girls, the way that they talk about things, I was the only feminist at my high school. I was that guy or that girl. And that seems crazy now because they're all like, whoa, only one feminist, because it's just so kind of popular. And yeah, so in many ways I know it feels really, really horrible sometimes and it feels like we're going backwards. I think in many ways we're going forwards, and I do see it. I see it more in the kids than I do. With adults.
Can I add to that?
Just really briefly, because we're going to have to wrap up, Mimmie. Yeah.
Okay. Just really briefly in that, I think there has been progress when it comes to women emancipation, and I think we really need to to acknowledge the work that has been done.
Yeah.
That doesn't mean that there's not more to be done. However, my advice in particular will be the young people should remember that they can run. However, they have to remember that if they run, they need to remember to walk with the elders and the older people who have walked the path because they know the way. Thank you.
And yeah, very nice. I think one thing I just wanted to add, picking up on that, and a couple of other things that have been said, to me, one of the greatest tragedies of the public discussion of feminism is that it does not acknowledge how important and emancipatory feminism can be for men too. And these discussions around men and mental health and the burden, frankly, of masculinity, why we're not having that conversation with these young boys is beyond me.
Yeah.
Well, thank you very much. We're going to have to leave it there. Thank you very much to all of the audience for questions. I told you it'd go really fast. And if we can thank Nelly, Anna and Mimmie, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Visit wheelercentre.com for the best in books, writing and ideas from Melbourne, Australia and the world.